The world has gone insane. Cosplayers rule the conventions. Gamers dominate the tabletop. And the internet. Sci-fi subjugates the movies. And fantasy rules the bookstore with an iron fist. Only one group can bring order to this unruly mob. A team of uber geeks, masters of the nerdly arts, trained for decades in the hobby shops and basements of the nation. Mobilized by the secret masters, they are the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Hello, operatives, and welcome to the Department of Nerdly Affairs. I'm your host, Rob Patterson, here with my co-host, Don Chisholm.
And the podcast they don't want you to hear.
And tonight, we are entering a new dimension of sight and sound, as we are going to explore UFOs in popular culture with our friend Jack Ward. Welcome back to the show, Jack.
Da 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 da.
But before we explore UFOs and their place in our society and what they really are, let's discuss about what we think they are. So, Don, what are UFOs? What do they mean? And why are they involved in our planet?
Sounds very 70s of you when you put it like that. But
In search of.
Oh, there's more music.
Did you know they're bringing that back with the new Spock guy as the host?
No.
Yeah, they're getting Zachary Quinto.
Zachary Quinto?
Yeah, they're bringing back In Search Of with him as the host.
That's kind of disturbing on a whole pile of levels.
Because Nimoy's not around, so they got Nimoy 2.0 to do it.
That's right.
But it's like not only are you doing a reboot, you're doing a reboot with the guy from the reboot that the guy who did the original did before doing the original.
In Search Of doesn't predate the original Star Trek.
No, it doesn't, but that's what I mean. Like, Nimoy was on Star Trek, and then he did In Search Of, so you've got the new guy who is on Star Trek, and now he's doing In Search Of.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of weird. I get that.
And then the entire world of imagination just collapses in on itself and is sucked into a tiny, tiny little orb.
So he better be, what you're saying is he better be the bad guy in Invasion of the Body Snatchers when they redo that again.
That's true.
Just everything he's going to do.
Eventually he'll do everything that Nimoy did. Maybe the bow to Bilbo Baggins too.
Didn't they do a Twilight Zone about that? A guy who had to take over because he killed Elvis?
Oh, they did one where the
80s.
guy finds Santa. Well, there was one where one of the original Twilight Zone where the old rummy finds Santa Claus dead in an alley.
Yes.
And steals his coat and ends up taking his, which is about as close to a happy ending as that show ever got.
Yeah, it was a classic.
Right, yeah.
Art Carney played that role, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool. All right, so let's talk UFOs. So, what are UFOs, Don?
The irony is all of what we just talked about really does kind of fit in, because by proper definition, UFO, unidentified flying object, is anything you see in the sky that you don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, is kind of important, because people have a habit of hearing UFO, and they think flying saucer loaded with big-headed aliens that are coming here to, abduct our cows and do experiments on our family and such.
No, I think that's just what people hope. And I agree, Don. I think that is very important to remember, because after all, we automatically think UFO equal alien, which is not necessarily true at all. They could be many different things that are not aliens, and probably are many different things that are not aliens. So, swamp gas, for instance.
Why, of course.
And with that in mind, though, people have been seeing UFOs for an awfully long time. How long have we been seeing UFOs for, Don?
The earliest reports, and this is again where that idea of it's something in the sky you don't know what it is important. The earliest reports I could see was in China, 47,000 years ago, that they had they found etchings on cave walls and that looked like these weird cylindrical objects in the air.
Right.
And then historically, there's been a bunch. There was actually a report during the reign of Thutmose III, who was an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, about people seeing these weird circles of flame traveling through the sky, and an official inquiry, as best they could, like 4,000 years ago, was made into this, and they ultimately determined, yep, flaming things in the sky, because they didn't have a lot of scientific.
Well, also, wasn't there in the Bible? There's Ezekiel in the Old Testament, who
Ezekiel saw the wheel.
Yep.
Is this the wheel he saw?
Yep.
That came from Project Blue Book, right?
Right. Yep. And
The television show.
and
I remember
angels
that.
came down out of those. Yeah, that was one of my favorites when I was a kid. And angels came out of the wheels, I think, or were they separate? I don't quite remember, but I know there were angels connected with them, or at least what he took to be angels.
What he took to be angels, for sure.
Yeah, that were basically heads with four wings.
I wonder
And
if
there
it
was
Kang or
ancient
Kodos.
Egypt. Yeah, there was ancient Egypt that had examples of fiery discs as well. And then, of course, you go all the way, into this Renaissance era, and there's pictures with like Mother Mary with potential UFOs in the background.
Yeah,
in the paintings too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like those things. I know the painting you're talking about.
Right.
And
Yeah, there's actually a couple that have, because there's one, it's in the background of two farmers in the field. It looks like a flying saucer, but it could be a hat.
right.
And then an unidentified flying hat goes by. But it ties into that idea that people have been recording weird shit in the sky since people have been recording things.
Pretty much.
And it's that idea that we don't know what it was. We don't always know what their level of understanding for things was.
Right.
Or how they interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's hard not to think of it as something really extraterrestrial. There's when you mentioned the Bible, one of the books that got edited out of the official Bible at the meeting of Nicaea, was that 900 AD, I think it was the Gospel according to St. Thomas.
Right.
And there's a reference at the beginning
The doubter.
Yeah, that when he was a kid, the angels came to him and they took him above the earth, so that he looked down and saw all of the earth at once, and it freaked him out, and so bad they brought him back, and he doesn't apparently do anything notable until like 30 or so years later.
Okay.
Which again, it's difficult to not interpret that in terms of extraterrestrials.
Very true. Don't also forget the ancient, was it the Hindu Vedas, of course, which include all the references to nuclear warfare and atomic aircraft and all this other stuff that are from about 2,000 or so years ago as well. It's like, what were they talking about there? And of course, there's like weird stuff carved in Hindu like statues. We could also go to the Aztecs as well with some of their weird aircraft-looking carvings and beliefs as well. So it looks like UFOs have been with us and part of our human popular culture for a very, very long time.
Right. Even Plutarch talked about it in Roman times as well. There were some suggestions during battles. And this is another thing. Like, one thing we have to sort of put on the table and hopefully try to discard is the degree of high strangeness that occurs with so much. And high strangeness, they sort of talk about this. It becomes more and more prevalent. Where, you can have UFO encounters and Bigfoot encounters all happening at the same time. And, the planet can be rocked with strange earthquakes, and there can be ghost sightings and just really weird. It's like a glitch in the Matrix almost. You know what I mean? Like something happens and somehow the mechanism breaks down and you see a ton of these weird things going on. That's quite a possible thing as well. So.
Yep. Right. That's definitely true. Occasionally Bigfoot does show up with UFOs and vice versa.
As we learned in the $6 Million Man.
Yes. That's true.
It's one of my favorite episodes as a kid, by the way.
Yeah, but Bigfoot there was a robot.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he came with aliens.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Right? And I remember that you couldn't touch the aliens in the show, or else they would basically just, like, die. Like, the heat of your hand or something like that would... And they were so fragile that if you touched them, they would, like, turn into dust. Like ash. They would just burn away into ash. And he could touch the girl, of course, because he was using his robot hand.
Right.
So he had this very gentle touch with his robot hand, and she didn't die.
Oh.
So it was very weird.
Okay, I'd forgotten about that one. Huh. I
Yeah.
just remember, Bigfoot on the $6 Million Man, because that rocked my world as a kid.
Yep.
Now the Venus probe
I think it was
I
so
agree.
popular that I think it was so popular that he came back again. That's
Yeah.
why I think they started off with Bigfoot and then they came back with the aliens as a secondary.
If I remember right,
thing,
we even talked about it in a previous episode. I remember I looked it up. The one time he appears, he's Lurch,
Cassidy.
Tom Cassidy,
Yeah.
Tom
and then
Cassidy,
the other
yeah.
time he's actually Jaws from the James Bond movie,
Wow.
which is Richard something.
Is it Richard Keel?
Richard Keel, that would be him, yes.
Yeah.
And so
There you go.
both of them in different seasons, they couldn't get one back, so they got the other guy to play because they're the resident big guys. The only big guy of the
Yeah,
time who
for
didn't
sure.
play Bigfoot was Andre the Giant, who would have been great casting.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure.
Moving forward, of course, even in the 1800s, they used to have airship scares where people would see mysterious airships, especially over North America, where presumably there weren't actually any airships supposed to be there at the time, but there they were. And people would see people, waving down at them from the airships, and occasionally people got abducted by these airships. And the question is, were they airships or what were they? Again, UFOs, unidentified flying objects.
Mm-hmm.
The casualness of the airship, of many of the airship conversations with people and stuff like that, really creeps me out.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm really creeped out by the airship stories. Mm-hmm. Like they had one in Japan where a beautiful young woman appears in like strange clothes, and the fisherman she appeared to said she held a square box that no one was allowed to touch, right? Mm-hmm. And spoke in a strange language, and it's almost like they're just sort of checking people out, and then if all of a sudden, a little while later, there's a whole bunch of children that are being abducted. I'm like, it's kind of really creepy how just relaxed they are around people.
Yeah. So, how many kids do you have in your village? Just wondering.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And the thing is, I think, I get the feeling, too, that it's so much easier. Again, if we're trying to put rationality to all this kind of thing, it's so much easier to have these kinds of really, in-your-face encounters with people in limited areas. Mm-hmm. Right? Because back those days, they didn't really have the same kind of worldwide phenomena of instantaneously sending pictures or texts or emails across the world going, oh my God, I was just abducted.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's almost like a different theme, with modern day alien encounters and ufology than there is from what you see in the past.
Well, they couldn't take selfies with them.
Yeah. But I mean, there's more of a deification or a curiosity, and I mean, there's fear, but there's not the same level because now it's almost like we know enough to be afraid, like truly afraid.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, because you're kind of hitting at one of the important things to remember with this, and a lot of paranormal stuff in general, but UFOs in particular. There's a lot of interpretation based on the cultural environment of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I've seen that kind of bandied about as proof for and against. But it's when you talked about the 1800s, going into the early 1900s, people would talk about seeing airships.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The airship, like the Zeppelin, the blimp, stuff like that, was relatively new. And it was something that people were kind of aware of. And I've seen the argument made that people were interpreting the phenomenon that years ago was a ball of fire in the sky as an airship because they're talking about the same thing, but there's that cultural component.
Yeah, they heard or at least read about these airship things they had in Europe. So they're like, hey, that must be an airship.
Mm-hmm. Well,
right.
They had them here too. That was hot air balloons were pretty common. And then the bigger ones, like I say, like the smaller Zeppelins and blimps were just kind of coming into production at that time.
Mm.
But again,
and then of course you go back to the earlier times and you got the elves and stuff like that from fairyland. But here's the other side of it where there's so much high strangeness that even today, little children, for example, who you find out later on through hypnosis or whatever that they claim that they were abducted. They see them as little dwarves or little elves or somebody that they've seen in another movie or a strange little man. There's stories about this huge owl was waving at me from the side of the road. And you're like, but I didn't think it was weird at the time other than it was a huge owl, right? So there's almost screened memories that are played with in that respect. And so maybe this is what's happening too. People are just being able to perceive things only so far as what they know, or it's being manipulated in one way or another that way.
Yeah, and it's entirely possible that what people are perceiving is totally, absolutely nothing anybody thinks it is.
Very true.
For sure.
And again, that can work both ways. Like, I know, for example, I don't think it's exactly coincidental, if you want to talk flying saucers, to jump ahead a little bit. It wasn't until you got into, say, the late 70s going into the 80s that you really had reports of triangular-looking unidentified flying objects.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And when we get to the end of the 80s, the U.S. government reveals the, the 117, the stealth fighter, which is like a big flying triangle.
Right. Although I would argue it could be something else, though, because in the 1970s is also when we get to the whole Chariots of the Gods pyramid connection thing.
Mm-hmm.
So one could also argue that that's influencing things as well. The whole Von Dyken business.
And if you listen to the UFO lore, which is part of the ufology in the popular culture, people are arguing too that the triangular craft are actually man-made craft based on techniques or technology from alien life forms. So whenever you see the triangular craft, it's just our guys testing these suckers out, that it's not the actual alien crafts themselves, but using their own human's kind of structure to try to
the American stealth fighters that Don just mentioned, pretty much.
Well, yes and no. According to the ufology, they'll say they're actually using UFO technology, which isn't the stealth fighters. It's anti-gravitics kind of thing. And there's a famous guy who went to Roswell and who's argued that he saw the technology. He was an engineer.
Oh, Lazar. Bob Lazar?
Lazar. Yeah. Bob Lazar. And so he's the one who's claiming that it's been repurposed, and it's taken them like over 40 years just to figure out how the darn thing works, kind of thing.
40 years ago being when the Roswell crash occurred.
Absolutely. Yeah. At the time. It was in the 80s when he came out.
Okay,
right?
let's drop back a tiny bit to continue our move forward. Okay, so the early part of the 20th century hits. Again, airships are up there. People are interpreting it in different ways. I know, Don, you have a belief that the modern UFO era starts with World War II. Is that correct?
Yeah, because when you look at the older reports, they were pretty sparse. Like, people would see things, people report strangeness. It's the kind of things that you got nowadays, but the reports were either tended to be very bereft. Like Jack was saying, people tended to be really nonchalant about them. Like, there's this story about the Tomato Man, which is supposedly in this, like, western town back in 1800s. This ship crashes from the sky, and they find this little weird dude that they think was piloting it, and they gave him a proper Christian burial in the graveyard. And nobody thought, this is like some weird extraterrestrial dude, and he should be studied or feared or worshipped as a god. He was just some poor guy that fell out of the sky, and they felt bad for him. What happens in World War II, when you get to the end of it, this is where you start getting like more fear. You start getting reports about the aliens interfering in our lives and that. And I think what happens is, I think a big part of that comes from World War II itself. Because you have to remember, World War I happens, Germany gets beaten, they're totally reamed after like World War II. They're made to pay all the damages to everybody. Their economy collapses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So nobody's thinking anything about Germany. The Nazis have been plotting and planning in secret for a few years. They build up their industry. They build up their forces. They develop new technology. And they start the Blitzkrieg, which is the Lightning War, which is just literally all of these like Nazi war machines come almost out of nowhere and just start thumping the shit out of Europe. And I think that idea, there's two things that come out of that you see start to play in UFO pop culture and even in a lot of sightings, and that is the idea of an implacable, unbeatable invading force, which we'd seen before, like the original War of the Worlds novel, that it details that sort of thing, but it's not like a militaristic effort. Like the alien invasion stories are kind of like they show up or they sneak in or they teleport in or they take over your brain. It's not this war, like intentional war machine, not usually. And secondly is this idea of success through superior technology. That I think when the Nazis invaded Europe, it scared the shit out of everybody, because it's like in this other part of the world, technology jumped a whole level. And part of that too is because after World War I, everybody thought that was the war to end all wars. It worked out so well we had a sequel. And everybody else abandoned a lot of their wartime research. So the Nazis show up with the Tiger II tank, and the Brits are working on the Whippet, which is like a cross between an armored combat vehicle and a car. And I think, because those are two ideas that you start seeing showing up in a lot of sci-fi, and in a few years in a lot of actual reports about supposed extraterrestrial activity. And like I say, I think that's why I would say...
Isn't the Nazi bell also in that that collection as well, potentially?
Yeah.
There's different stories about the bell, yes.
Yeah, that supposedly it was... Because what you see happen in World War II, we've mentioned Operation Paperclip, which was the Allies sneaking Nazi scientists out. So they can make use of... Werner von Braun is a great example of that.
Yep.
And there's all these stories about that the Nazis had all of this like massive, amazing technology. Like Die Glock was supposedly like a time machine.
Yeah.
That we had the nuke, but the Nazis were on the edge of a time machine. And that idea too, you start seeing creeping up in the next couple of decades in like the flying saucer stories. Because the idea, like Jack has already said, that we're reverse engineering stuff that we either traded for or captured from them. Right. And there's this secret world of mega technology that most of us are not privy to. I think, again, that comes out of a lot of this like World War II stuff, that the Nazis had developed things and were on the verge of a bunch of breakthroughs that just scared the shit out of everybody else. And it wasn't because they had like, you know, reverse engineered the Shroud of Turin or captured alien devices. It was when you really don't care about humanitarian values and safety standards, you can advance technology in one hell of a hurry.
Very true. Very true. Okay, so the Nazis introduced all this advanced technology, so suddenly invaders with advanced technology became the enemy.
Well, it was an image that was burned into everybody, like in the West's brain. It was, you'd lived through it when you get to say the 50s, which is 50s going into the 60s, which is another big time when like flying saucer stuff is entertaining. You see a lot of that World War II imagery, and I think it's because a lot of the people producing it, it's still in mind. Like, and then what happens at that?
Well, it's the Cold War too, right?
Yeah.
The Cold War is huge. Like, I mean, even in the Twilight Zone, they had the monsters are due on Maple Street. That entire episode is this alien that flies overhead, and people lose their minds and start attacking each other by the end of the episode. And it was there literally as you know, to reference as an analogy for the Cold War and the fear that people had for the Red Scare, and they used aliens for that. But it doesn't mean that people won't look for the thing that they're afraid of most, and it is alien in its own way to that to what they know. So
because the jump to the Cold War Soviet thing, that becomes another running theme, and I think again it's because this image of this image of the Blitzkrieg was still burnt in people's brains, and they were terrified of another one.
Right.
Because a funny thing, when they made the 1953 War of the Worlds movie, the techniques that the aliens use are Cold War era Soviet battle techniques. how they come in groups of three, and they show how they were creating that like a net around their targets. How these different groups of three would key up and coordinate with two other groups, and they were forming that kind of like a mesh pattern. That's really similar to what the Russians actually did back in those days. That was their big mass combat strategy.
Funny. I would have never known that. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. No. I didn't know that either. I had broken stuff down to kind of like themes that you see about UFOs in popular culture, And so there's sort of like what's the real story kind of thing, because they sort of take those kind of elements. So government conspiracies was one of them. Maybe you guys can come up with some more that come up. Brother from another planet, right? And you see that in some of those things. Even evil aliens eat humans or want our resources.
Right.
That'd be another one, right? Aliens from another universe or a parallel universe. Aliens are truly the Earth people, which is this, the Sitchin stuff, right? Aliens think we're unimportant. So that's, if you want to go back and take a look at something like we get killed because they're basically worried about something else. So that was the big threat in like Star Trek 4. Right, the aliens showed up and they were trying to save the whales, and they just thought that they would wipe out everything except for protecting the whales for that reason. Aliens are future humans, so you get this idea that aliens are actually us from the future, which brings us to sort of saviors or heroes from the stars. Is another big one, and we talked about in a previous episode of that television show back in the 70s, where they came at. And animal experiments, which is what you brought up, Rob, earlier. Alien bases on Earth, which is fascinating because there was a huge article about the Russians releasing material or having it released against what they wanted to do, that there's actually massive battles going on between UFOs in the ocean around Russia.
Really?
Alien bases on Earth, that's what I said. And then the last one, which I find really fascinating, is the idea of a breakaway civilization. And we're just mistaking. So there's this group of people who have this incredibly far distant technology that are human beings, and maybe they got it from aliens, or maybe they developed it themselves, but they're building up because they know the Earth is going to get blown up or some way, and they're so far ahead of us now. They've got like 5,000-10,000 years ahead of us poor plebes.
Huh. Okay, those are all really interesting, Jack. Okay, you
Are there any other themes that you can think of that we entertain in ufology?
I think you pretty much got all of them. What's interesting to note, and this is where it's odd how the real life cases parallel entertainment, is that those ideas come in waves.
Right.
That you don't generally get all of that all at once, but you get different kind of odd groupings of them.
Mostly in connection with what's involved in popular culture at that time.
Well, this is the question, and it goes back to the episode that you guys just did a while ago where it talked about media. Is media sorting these because that's what's in popular culture? So do they go in waves because media is going, oh geez, we need the next breakaway civilization story because we're doing so much people really want to know about new tech stuff, right? Yeah. Or let's find some stories about people being abducted from evil aliens because people are terrified of those Muslim people.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with that too. There's two things I'm going to want to add to that. There's a book called Watch the Skies by a guy named Curtis Peebles.
Right.
That he looks at the UFO phenomenon in terms of that. The book is an attempt to debunk it, and he shows how a lot of what people are reporting ties into what's going on at the time.
By the way, that was the original title of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Watch the Skies?
Watch the Skies?
Yes, I believe that was the actual title of it. Yeah, originally.
There's a bunch of things that use that title.
Yeah.
That's why I gotta mention this guy's name, because it's the one book that anybody had to debunk. And it's pretty slick because he makes reference to the idea that you don't see, like when the government conspiracy idea of flying saucers gets popular in the 70s, you don't really see the black helicopters that everybody associates with it now until near the end of the 70s. And he points out that the sinister black helicopter reports mirror a lot of the reports that you saw of the helicopters in
Right, yeah, they do.
And then that sort of ties into one of the weird aspects of this, which is credibility.
Right.
And this is why I think the idea of UFO is just something you don't know what it is that was in the sky ties in, because people will fill in the blanks with their pet project or pet theory a lot in these cases.
For sure.
Whether they should or not. A good example is back in the day, when you go to the 50s and that, the governments of like the States, Canada, Britain, I think most nations had plans in place for what you do if aliens show up. What do you do if we shoot down a flying saucer? What do we do if like they're kidnapping a town? And a lot of people who are really into the UFO phenomenon take that as acknowledgement that it's real. The government is planning. It has to be real. And that's not exactly what that was. It's the idea that the military hates surprises, so they come up with contingencies for everything.
I heard rumors that the U.S. military actually has plans for a zombie uprising.
Yep.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah, it is. And it's because, number one, well, you never know. Number two, it's a fantastic intellectual theory, because if you think, if somebody released a weaponized bioagent, like a fast-acting virus, that it would operate and spread like a zombie attack does in the movies. So that principle, thinking of it as a zombie invasion, it does allow you to correlate data that would be useful in something much more likely, like somebody releases a biological weapon.
Very true.
And in all of those cases, it's that idea that people who are just waiting for the zombie attack or the aliens to invade look at those reports and say that's gospel, that's God's honest proof, the government's covering up, they know something. And it's not. It's something a little different. It's just they're playing what if. It doesn't necessarily mean that they believe this. And then that's where the credibility thing comes in. And that's how conspiracy theories happen, because if you say, nope, this is just bullshit, we're just doing it for the fun of it, there's going to be people who say, they don't do anything for the fun of it, it's obviously real, we better stockpile weapons, Jesus is coming back, hide in the basement!
Very true, very true. And I might comment as well that another example of this is actually just going back, sorry to go back in time for just a sec here, back to your World War II thing. So during World War II, they had the Foo Fighters and also ghost rockets, they used to call them. There were the various UFOs that people saw during World War II. Well, in 1947, around Mount Hood, Washington, a man whose name I'm forgetting again.
Kenneth Arnold.
There we go. I knew you'd fill that in. Saw a couple UFOs flying around that were saucer shaped. And so he radioed back in and said, hey, there's these like giant flying discs there. They look like flying saucers. Suddenly, mysteriously, every UFO after that looks like a flying saucer. Yeah. Not everyone, but a great many of them do.
Many of them do. Not all of them. Yes.
You're right. Many of them do. And the point is that, once people have that idea of, oh, this is what they should look like, suddenly that's what they look like. Which shows that there is definitely some belief going on there.
But even 3 days later, there's the Maury Island incident, where the guy describes them as donut-shaped objects, which is pretty close to flying saucers, right? So these are just very similar kind of descriptions that are happening. That's the problem. Is a lot of people say, well, yeah, they only came after this, but you go back and we've already talked about the fact that there are tapestries with UFO looking, like flying saucer looking ships, and that while it does hit the massive set of the media, and they use the term flying saucer ever since then, this isn't the first time that we see saucers. Saucers have been seen in various different ways. They're just not really described as that because somebody didn't drink tea. Right?
That's
who knows? There's a reason why.
True.
To be fair, and again, I it's interesting because I am skeptical about so many different things. I'm one of those people that if somebody tells me that, oh yeah, I totally believe in flying saucers, I'm on the skeptical side. And if somebody's really skeptical, I'm on the believer side. So I tend to sort of push one way or the other. So Don just gave us a really good book of the skeptical side. I'm going to give you a really good book on the believer side. That, in fact, if they tell you to read one book about UFOs, read the one by Leslie Kean called UFOs. It's because Leslie Kean is a really, really well-credentialed, real professional journalist. And so when she actually came together and put this, like she worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer, did Atlantic Journal, Constitution, the Boston Globe, just Herald, the Tribune, the Globe and Mail. She's so credentialed for this stuff. And she actually sat down as an investigative reporter. She's a well-known investigative reporter. And spent a lot of time with the Freedom of Information Act.
Right.
And she got together a ton of information and went, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that's really disconcerting. And there's a lot of stuff suggesting very clearly that the government knows stuff that's going on. And so she I think it was in 2007, she did an international press conference about the whole thing. And it was startling, the information that she got, because again, she also brings up the point, and like, even if you go and look at tons of videos called Project Disclosure.
Right.
There are hundreds of hours of really qualified people talking about their experiences. People who are high up in the military, people who are very well known at doing, who work at airports doing aerial phenomena identification. Police officers and their experiences, firefighters, a lot of professionals who've done that. It's just not just a couple of bucktooth people in the middle of a country town. Right. There's a lot more that's going on. And I have a personal connection too, because my father opened up to me to tell me about his experience, and it was pretty startling. So,
okay. Well, please do tell.
He was about 10 or 11. Maybe he said he was around 10, 11, 12. I forget the exact. He'll tell me the age because he knows it very clearly. He was out living in Galt area in Ontario, and Galt was not the big sprawling metropolis as it was right now. He was right on the edge of countryside, right? And there was all sorts of woods and stuff like that. And he said he was like around sort of like light woods, picking carrots with his friends in the middle of the sort of evening. It was dark out, right? And they were just sitting around, hanging around in the woods, and suddenly above them, like less than 50 feet, hovering in front of them, was like the Close Encounters alien ship. And it went right past them super slowly without a sound. And everything around him was dead silent. All the crickets stopped, everything stopped, and they just watched this for a couple of minutes. And my parents just told me recently that they actually found an article of that the next day where a bunch of people had that same experience where they saw this thing. So he was shocked that it was that. And that wasn't the only experience. So that was his close-up one. He and I both had become junior forest rangers. And he was a junior forest ranger back in like the late 50s, of course, 60s, early 60s. And I was much later, I think it was like late 80s. And in the junior forest ranger in Ontario, they send you up north where you do a lot of work with regular forest rangers, and you clear cut some stuff, and you plant trees, and you do all that kind of stuff. Right. Well, he was on sort of like fire duty, watching with the fire towers, which they didn't have us doing because they didn't need to really much anymore. And one night there was a fire in the forest. Something had hit the forest, and they had, the next morning, it was all covered with government planes and agents, and they were picking up debris that wasn't their own plane stuff. And the other people had gone and seen it that were in the group and the whole bit. And he said, "Well, do we report this to the forest ranger there?" And the guy basically went white-faced and said, "No, we never report these things."
Oh, these things. Awesome.
Yeah. So there's a real, so there's, when people say, well, everybody wants to know, not really. Like, most people don't want to know. Most people are really happy. It's like having Trump in the White House. It's not easy for people to have somebody who's a disruptor. And I'm not saying he's a good person in the White House, but the fact that anybody who's a disruptor, who's going to change things a lot, really, really makes people uncomfortable. Right? So now, and I'm not even talking about religious people, I'm just talking about people in general. If you have to change your entire mindset about something, that's really shocking for people. And people like to feel that they've got a good handle on the way the world works.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
And that's, great stories come from that. The whole idea of, people being afraid of vampires or ghosts. If they had any kind of proof of any of those things, it would be terrifying. There's one of those great quotes, and I forget who said it. It's like there's the two most shocking statements in the world is there's no such thing as aliens in the universe, and there's such thing as aliens in the universe, right?
Right.
Because both are shocking in one way or another. If there's nothing else but human beings in an entire universe, that's utterly shocking. And if there's actual aliens that we can prove, that's utterly shocking. The truth is, nobody wants to really, come across the reality of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's the movie Red Planet Mars is basically about that.
Mm-hmm.
Which I believe starred Peter Graves, I think.
Right.
Was about
Okay.
It was about they made contact with supposedly beings on Mars, that this scientist and his family had built this gravitic radio. Mm-hmm. And they were getting messages from Mars, and they would ask questions, and the world was listening, and every time they got an answer, it just fucked everything up really bad.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Because, there's a part where they say, well, we use gasoline for fuel. What do you use? And they said, well, we harness cosmic rays. It's cheap, it's easy, and we'll teach you how to do it. And then the economy collapses because the bottom falls out of, like, the fossil fuel market. And then there's riots and groups are starting to, like, protest. And every time they get one of these answers, it just totally wrecks the Earth because it's this fundamental change, like Jack was saying, and how we think about something we never thought about before.
Yeah, no, that there's a book called The Three Body Problem. It's a Chinese novel, won the Hugo like last year, a translated version of it, and that book goes a little bit into that, and without getting into spoiler territory, because it's a really good book. I highly recommend if you get the chance. But yes, one of the things that's going on in that book is the humans are in contact with aliens, and it's messing things up because the powers that be are having to decide, well, do we admit this? Do we admit that we're actually talking to aliens? And what happens if we do admit it? And as people are slowly becoming aware that this is going on, it starts really messing things up. Because people don't know how to deal with it. Like, basically, their theory, if I remember right from the book, is something to the effect of, if people know, you're going to get generally two kinds of people. Well, you get more than two, but generally speaking, you'll get those who are like, oh, that's really cool, aliens. And then you'll get those who are going to worship them as gods, basically, who are going to be like, oh my god, my new alien overlords. And that's a bit of a big problem. Because, there are some people who literally are totally okay with the idea that, wow, these beings are more advanced than us. We should worship them.
That's right. Cargo cults.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, that's exactly it.
If you think about it, though, you can also organize it in the same way of any kind of new technology. You'll have the early adopters. You'll have the people that say, prove me this is true. And then you'll have the people that will never want anything to do with it, right? And so you'll have the people who will do everything they can to prove that they're demons. Or it doesn't matter what kind of evidence you may have. They could be the sweetest aliens in the world. They will never accept them. To do so would radically change the way that they see the world, and that would be hell, right? So you're going to have that regardless. And if you know that's the situation, the best thing you can do is try to, be able to limit that in one way or another, or do these little slow releases, which is one of the arguments that I've seen a lot. Like even the big reveal that Pentagon has been researching this, that happened last Christmas, right? That huge thing that was last Christmas is the Pentagon's been researching all this stuff.
Yep.
But then there's also a really interesting book that was put out, and I think we should talk a bit about it because I think it really fits really well with a lot of what we're talking about in popular culture. It's called Silver Screen Saucers, Sorting Fact from Fantasy in Hollywood's Movies.
Right.
So
okay.
It was just recently, and they did an interview in Mysterious Universe about it with the guy. It was really fascinating. And he did some research, and he started to find out that, basically all the big budget movies that had to do with aliens, like The Day the Earth Stood Still and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the whole that, there was an arm of the military that was never quite identified what they were, but they came in with some sort of military, credentials. And they started telling people, the aliens should look like this, or you should. They were there as consultants, but nobody knows who paid them.
Right.
And the alien ship should look like this. And the suggestion is in the saucers is that, well, some of them were watching what they were doing. They're also trying to slowly to sort of release what would society think if the aliens were a bit like this. Like there's stories that, for example, in Independence Day, the aliens, the evil aliens, there's a species that's very much like that in the universe. And so they wanted to see how people would react to that. So
okay,
and it's the same. Yeah, sorry, it's the same thing with pleasant species. How will people react to that? Is there any So they want it's almost like the government is trying to put us in their own little psychological experimental thing. What would people think if they actually knew this was true?
Right.
Well, there's kind of two caveats to that, though, that I think you got to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is the idea of like government consultants, especially to go back to the 50s, that was kind of a standard because remember they wanted like the proper morals and values stressed.
Right.
And it's entirely possible if you had these unnamed government guys sticking their nose into the extraterrestrial movies, it was to add all of the anti-communist stuff.
Sure.
That it was considered a psyop to make people afraid of the Red Menace. And that's one of the reasons there is so much of that in the movies of like the day.
Right.
And then there's also the idea that it might have nothing to do with extraterrestrials. It might be like a double blind that the government does want to see how would people react to this, not because of like an alien thing. They're just doing some kind of like psychological tally on the public in general. So they're just throwing in this stuff, and like the alien imagery in that is the way that they sneak it in without it seeming like,
well, there's that poor guy that the government has admitted drove insane because they dropped him off. Well, they specifically gave him like hints about stuff like this, and they set him up to think that he was actually on the track to discover aliens, and they were helping him. But they were totally just messing with him. It's really quite cruel. And then, of course, you forget that they also had like Steven Spielberg, when he did Close Encounters of the Third Time, he was really researched. Like so much of that stuff was actually what they were doing in UFO stuff at the time. In fact, Alan Hynek, the civilian scientific advisor to Project Blue Book, was a guy that they used him in their research. He was the technical advisor on the show, and he even had a cameo.
Right.
So I mean, he spent a lot of time researching to see how realistic it is. Like, remember in the first scene with all the airplanes that come in that Mexican desert, they're all from like the Lost Flight 19 ships, right? So he really pulled from a lot of historical records to try to sort of throw in stuff about what had happened, or at least what people thought had happened. This is a problem, right? The ufology, which is kind of like fandom for UFOs, gets mixed up so much with the historical aspects that people start not really understanding what is real and what is fictional. And this is where I get to what I call the X-Files factor.
Okay.
And this is what
life
really
is badly written and repetitive.
That too.
Well, there's that too. Yeah.
What really ticks me off is that if I show somebody like a really cool video or something like, wow, this is really interesting, and this was the whole, this happened to these people, and this is what they said their experience was, the response is, I've seen that up before in the X-Files, so it never happened. So the idea basically that if Hollywood could recreate anything, therefore it can't possibly exist in real life. Right?
Wow.
But I mean, people do that, right? They see something before, and they get immune to it because they've seen it. And I think that's part of the aspect too, is like, how much can we release? How much of this stuff can we release so that if there is something real there, nobody would know the truth? It's, again, to go back to Donald Trump, it's the same kind of thing that he does. It's like people think, like, yeah, he's nuts in all of his Twitter ings. But it's also kind of brilliant because he's making people so sick of all this that when the time actually comes, you're like, oh my God, we've been talking about this for 14 months now. I don't care anymore. It doesn't matter. Right?
Well, it works the other way too. Like when you talk about movies, because Hynek goes back before Blue Book. He's part of Project Sign.
Right.
But the idea that if I'm making a movie about humans contacting extraterrestrials, and I say, I did all these research. I had access to these like former government researchers. I checked these files. It's all based on what real evidence points to. That's a cheap, cheesy way of getting credibility for my film.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them that do that. A famous example, I think, for that was when in the 90s when they did Fire in the Sky.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
About the guy getting abducted, and they have like the horrifying scene of the aliens doing shit to him.
God, that was terrifying.
It was.
I knew that story beforehand too, right? I forget the Travis Walton.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's his actual experience that, as he says it, in 1975, he left with a whole bunch of his friends, and he wakes up one time walking on the highway like 2 weeks later or something like that, and nobody knew where he was. Still in the same clothes and the whole bit, yeah.
But most of the stuff with like the aliens and the creepy scenes and that's not part of his report. Like,
no, you're right.
It was, they added it, and because as I recall, I think he sued them over that.
Yep.
And it's this idea that you take that little kernel of truth and then you blow it up, and when you get to something like controversial and weird like UFOs, that just kind of muddies the water even further, because it's like you say, people will either discredit it because they've seen it in a movie, or they'll see it in a movie and it cements that idea in their head, and now that must be what it's really like.
So here's the interesting, because we want to talk about that. His experience, Travis Walton's, was in 1975, but it wasn't until 77, 2 years later, that the famous Greys were showing up in Spielberg.
Yeah.
So right.
But
so his experience that he had predates the cinematic experience. So it's not something you could echo in the same way, right? You can't sit there and say, well, you know, he got that experience because of the whole thing. Similarly, very similar kind of descriptions from which many people consider to be like the birth of the whole abduction phenomenon was the Betty and Barney Hill one back in the 50s, right? And so those kind of descriptions they have of the aliens as well totally predated anything that, you know, any of the ways that we always saw in the 50s as like little green men or big hairy monsters, right?
Well,
and
or
that
the
didn't
Nordics
show up in the same way. What?
Or
Sorry?
the Nordics. Remember,
Nordics.
they'd also be like super hot alien chicks that would have sex with you.
True.
There were a lot of reports of that.
I'm not sure the Nordics would, though. The Nordics are always seen as like really, really cerebral. They're like very Spockish kind of thing. So interesting. Yeah. Who's the guy that who is from like Norway or Sweden or something like that? Billy somebody who did a ton of photos back in the 50s, like for 30 years. He people kept saying they got to be faked, but they couldn't figure out how he faked them because they're so clear.
Is that the guy it turned out to be like a chicken incubator he was taking pictures of?
I don't think they ever found out.
Because there was one guy. Because if you ever seen
Billy
The Invaders,
Billy Meyer, Swiss citizen, right? His story is weird. It's the weirdest story. He talks about like being taken up by the aliens. He's had like 2 or 3 relationships, and I don't mean sexual, but relationships with friends that are aliens, and they take him back in time, and they take him to other planets, and they take him to all these different things. It's crazy stuff. Sorry.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
It is. You mentioned the Greys. There's an interesting thing to that. Because what we think of as the Greys wasn't the Greys for a while. Because even back in the day, they'd always talk, like in the 50s and the 60s, abductees would refer to what seemed like a subcaste of alien, which are the little round-headed dudes.
Right.
But the Spielberg ones were closer to the reports of the day, because if you remember when you finally see one of like the taller ones, the commander types, he has blue eyes. He has very human-looking eyes. What we think of as the Grey doesn't happen until after Whitley Strieber in the 80s.
Right. Communion is the book that he made, and they did a couple of others, Transformation and the whole bit.
Having those big blank eyes.
Right.
And then that becomes the standard, and that's when you really start seeing them. The abduction stories prior to that, even the creepier ones tend to have that weird blasé one. Like even Betty and Barney Hill, she talked about them doing experiments and it was painful and that, but then she gets on to like they take her to the command center and show her the space map and that. It wasn't until Communion that it became like this really horrifying, terrible thing that these dead-eyed like horrible, chalky, skinned-looking things would do to you. And then after that, everything was that. And that's where, like I say, it's that problem that what's going on culturally affects what people report.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the thing, if you go back like to the 70s, that they always described them as having blue eyes, but they had human eyes, even if they were the little stumpy guys.
It's not until later that they have these big, like, black eyes or whatever.
Yeah, well, like a shark.
And then we get the whole, like I'd mentioned beforehand, which considered almost like the Red Book, the Russian manual that was found, where they have up to 82 different species that they've monitored that have come to Earth. And that the story comes from a couple of friends cleaning out, I can't remember, I hear different stories, uncles or fathers' files after he's died, and he was from was it Smirch?
Smirch. Which I keep thinking, wasn't that the bad guy on Man from U.N.C.L.E. or something?
Yes, no, it's something. Yeah, you're right. It sounds like that. Yeah.
Was that Thrush?
Thrush, yes.
Thrush.
You're right, it was Thrush.
It is close, though, isn't
close.
it?
It is close, yeah. And so they found this in Russian and translated it and added pictures of their own and the whole bit. And it's supposed to be a very high-level handbook that was handed out to between Russians about various different aliens and who they are and where they came from and how many times they've been connected to various different places on Earth. And I'll give them this, it's really inventive. Mm-hmm. If you actually go read, and I there's a link of YouTube for the 82 aliens. That I can't find my actual PDF copy of it, but you can buy it as well online on Amazon. But the description of the aliens go everything from the next solar system over kind of thing to galaxies away to fifth dimensional creatures because we're stuck in 3-dimensional bodies to it's very inventive, the people who have gone through and spent the time thinking about it. And of course, Earth is caught in typical theme fashion between, the evil ones who want to abuse us and the good ones who want to be able to save us and the neutral ones that want to leave us alone, right? So
right.
For some reason, we are the crux of all things that are happening, right?
Yeah, that's where I started having problems with this kind of stuff. It's like, well, okay, so we're still the center of the universe? I mean, okay, that still seems odd to me.
Well, I would look at it this way. There's a couple of different answers, and one of them is, let's suggest that the Drake equation is a little off, and we're really, really rare. If we're really, really rare, all kinds of, even if we're not super rare, let's say they've cracked the faster than light code and they make it really easy to travel from one place to another. As human beings, we would be checking out other species. We would totally be checking them out, and we would totally be, trying to figure out where they are. And we would also make mistakes where we would, on one case, help them out, and it could work out to be really devastating. And thousands of years later, we would decide, maybe we'll be a little more careful about that kind of thing.
Right.
So if we're really, really rare, it's easy for us to find. If we're really, really plentiful, well, maybe there's a reason for that too. Just like the Star Trek episode, which I found really cool, where maybe we were planted here. Mm-hmm. Maybe, or we've been adjusted in some way or another. As the argument is from the Greys is they need our DNA for some reason. They're stagnating and they're dying, and that's why they're going through all that kind of stuff. So the big thing that I always like to point out that people don't get is that the reasons for aliens wanting us are alien. We're always trying, we can't possibly necessarily understand. It's not that simple because they're coming from an entirely different alien experience. And they're coming from an entirely different alien technology. We're always trying to sit there and say, well, if we as humans wouldn't do this, we just drop down on the White House lawn. Not necessarily. I mean, so how do we know that they can even perceive us? How do we know that they don't see us like bugs or bacteria? And they're just kind of interested, like, this is really unique bacteria we're experiencing. Like, we have no idea how they perceive us, or if they do. So.
See, that hits the big sci-fi dilemma, though. That you can't say with any kind of extraterrestrial what's realistic, because we only have one example of life in the universe, and that's our planet.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's entirely possible we get out in space and they're all exactly like us. That for whatever reason,
Yep.
Mhm.
we are an inevitability. That and I've put forth the idea that people poo-poo the notion that like, well, they're like dog people, and then there's cat people on this planet and shark people. That could be how it works, because the things that we think of as different species could likewise, like when over 5 billion years, when amino acids turn into sentient life,
Right.
those are universal constants, and you get them in different mixes. But
Right. Yeah.
that idea that, and
Yep.
it's
There's a
entirely
theory about that too. There's a theory that basically that the format that it becomes human beings is sort of like stamped in this universal understanding of how intelligent life operates. Right? So you can have slight variations, but you're always going to have, or most likely going to have, more bipedal human-like creatures that come out of the primordial ooze and, you know, take over a planet, as opposed to, you know, hivers from Traveller. If that
Right.
you know, like, hivers were always interesting, you know, like starfish, right? You know, like, basically. So, I'm just making all kinds of things for Don to have to Traveller. Now I got to go find a link for Traveller. Hyperlink. All right.
Yep. Hyperlink. There we go. Yeah. No. And that's an interesting idea. Of course, that's also a really scary idea if you think about it, because that goes along with the idea, again, the three-body problem talks about this, where the idea that the universe could actually be kind of like a jungle floor. And they use this analogy where you've got all these different life forms, but the thing is that the strong life forms prey on the weak. And so therefore, if they're just like us and they're just as competitive and somewhat paranoid as we are, then if they become aware of us, they're going to do their best to actually wipe us out, to eliminate the competition before we become a threat.
Right. Now, here's the counter to it, and this is from Stephen Greer, Dr. Greer, who I think is a little too wingding about, you know, our cosmic brothers love us. But to be fair, he's got a really good point. If they wanted to wipe us out, we'd be gone.
Maybe they will, but they haven't got. Keep in mind, Jack, that our radio signal bubble that we're basically creating with all our, you know, electromagnetic noise that perhaps they will use to find us,
Yes,
has only gone out so many light years at this point.
So you're assuming that they haven't found us, and when they do, it's really bad. It's like Stephen Hawking saying it's not a good idea to send out.
Exactly.
We are the native species, the native Indians, waiting for the Europeans to come and give us their deadly blankets.
And even if, let's say, they are in a planet that's only, you know, a dozen light years away, in which case they have heard us, they may not be capable of getting to us yet, or they may already be en route.
Right. Which
Assuming,
was that
this,
big
of course,
concern.
assumes that.
Sorry, that big concern at one point. Remember that massive object that came into the solar system and then left and looked like a big needle kind of thing? And people were like, this does not look like an asteroid. Asteroids don't look like this kind of thing. And it just sort of spun in, and then it used the slingshot themselves back out of our from the sun.
Well, themselves. We were pretty sure it actually was a kind of cluster of rocks, basically.
Yes, yeah,
that,
exactly. But
it
that
wasn't
was one
exactly
of the thoughts, right?
Powered, but but we were worried about that. It's like,
For sure.
shit, is this something like actual? Or is this our rendezvous with Rama moment? What's going on here?
That's right. Yeah.
But that may still come in our lifetime.
Well, speaking of astronauts, what do you think about Edgar Mitchell's proclamations then?
Oh, remind me, what are they?
So Edgar Mitchell is famous. He's like a famous NASA astronaut. Walked on the moon, part of Apollo 14 mission. He has been declaring for many years now that we are being visited. This is his own words. We are being visited. It is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence. I call upon our government to open up and become part of this planetary community that is now trying to take our proper role as a spacefaring civilization. So he had experiences both off-world, and he feels he was visited many times on Earth by aliens. That they actually had a conversation with him about this kind of stuff, and knew that the government knew all about this. And so this isn't, again, if you want to talk about credibility,
right?
You don't get much more credible than an astronaut. They don't put nutcases up in the air for a reason.
That's true.
They don't trust them
true.
with trillion-dollar equipment. They go through all kinds of psychological battery testing, right? So,
well, it doesn't mean though that they're not affected by it. I remember hearing stories about some of the astronauts. Oh, there was the guy who was the twin. He and his twin brother was on Earth, and then he went up and lived on the space station for like a year. He just came back like a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And after he came back, he went through all kinds of hell. Like because of all the biological, because his body had adapted to 0G. And then he'd wake up like in the middle of the night and he was like swollen up like a balloon and things like that.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of physical issues,
up.
but there's no, I haven't heard of any actual mental problems from people coming back. I've just heard of physical issues like vascular problems, muscular problems, structural problems with the back. But I haven't heard that there's been psychological problems that have damaged them. The only changes I've heard from that they've noticed from astronauts was once they see the Earth as like from a distance, they stop seeing themselves as part of a particular nation.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, I've heard that too.
They just get this universal understanding that you know what, we live on this little blue planet together. We got to stop fighting over stupid territory things. So,
and they just won't stop singing "Kumbaya" for some reason.
There you go. Yeah.
That's because the alien parasites want us to lower our defenses.
Oh my God, what was that? They've had a number of those movies where you bring back a parasite that like from the moon or something like that too.
Oh, that's a classic, dude.
It's a classic, yeah. So I mean, that's another theme is the parasite, right? I mean, even like Alien is a different kind of parasite, but that's another theme of stories is that we are being eaten up by something alien that has taken us over.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Which one was it? Was it I Married an Alien from Outer Space? There's one where the astronaut's wife. The astronaut's wife, yeah.
Right, yeah.
But there was an earlier, like 1950s version of that, basically, where
there was. I Married a Monster from Outer Space was one.
It was I Married a Monster from Outer Space, yeah, where the astronaut goes up. When it comes back, it's not really her husband.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Well, there's a bunch. That was a Night of the Blood Beast. It's Alien. It's the same thing, except it eats your face.
Well, what about the Thing, right?
Yeah, the thing is the same idea. That's
a little different, but
well, isn't it the Thing? I always get them mixed up. Is it the Thing that comes from like an ice? What's the one that the John Carpenter?
It's here. They're all the same. They're all an alien. It comes from a short story called "Who Goes There?"
Right.
And in the original short story, they basically accidentally thaw out an alien life form. They're up in a research station.
Ice Station Zero or Zebra is another one that they take from that story too, right?
I don't know. No, that was an action movie. I thought
that's a war movie.
No, it started off as a radio drama that was similar kind of stuff. Anyway, go ahead. That.
Yeah, so the original short story, they basically, they dig up the alien, which they quickly discover can basically shapeshift to look like anyone and is telepathic, so it can pretend to be people.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But there's actually, in the original story, there's a flaw. It's not as powerful as the John Carpenter one, or as absolutely all-consuming, literally.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But they eventually figure out there's some kind of like psychological trick. I can't remember quite what it is, but they figure out basically a way to figure out who is the alien, and
it's the blood.
Deal with them.
It's the blood. So if they take some of the blood and they try to like put flame up against it or something like that, the blood will react because it's still a living.
That's John
That's
Carpenter's
the movie.
version.
Oh, that's the
John
original
story is different.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
The original short story is different. It actually there's a psychological trick.
Oh, okay.
In that one that they use, because it can only replace a single person. It can't replace multiple people in that one. Okay, it's not an infection. And then there's the first version of that with James Arnaz, The Thing, which is my personal favorite of the lot. I loved that one as a kid, and that's just kind of a Frankenstein alien monster, plant guy monster menacing people. That's it's fun, but it doesn't have the whole parasite thing.
Yeah.
And then there's the John Carpenter one, which I classify as one of the scariest movies of all time.
Yes,
and
terrifying.
And because it is like that parasite, and it's replacing multiple people, and people get really, really into who's a thing and who's wasn't a thing, and apparently like there are some people who, I remember one guy, he said he and his wife watch it every year, and their game is to see if they can figure out what order the thing replaced people in.
Right.
based on what what the thing, and here's the really messed up thing. At the end, there's the two guys who are left. One of them is a thing. There's a subtle reference. This is a spoiler, but whatever. To
a 30-year-old movie.
There are two guys. Only one of them actually has his breath is frosting up. The other one has no frost breath when he speaks.
Oh, clever.
They did that on purpose.
Very cool.
So the thing is still around even at the very end, and it ends how it ends. But anyway, so the thing is an old story. I think it's from the 1950s. I think Who Goes There was written. I wish I could remember.
1938.
It's 38
from Astounding Science Fiction, and it's by John W. Campbell.
Yeah, I thought it was Campbell.
I forgot. Yeah, he did a ton of sci-fi. Good for him.
Yeah, the original one's a bit different than what we think of as like The Thing. Basically, is John Carpenter's The Thing. That's what everyone thinks of, right?
Yeah.
Mostly because once you've seen it, you can never unsee it, and it will etch itself into your brain.
Yeah. Well, by the way, you don't think there was another guy because he wrote it under a pen name. So the pen name was Don A. Stewart.
Okay.
But it was John W. Campbell for the reason. So there you go.
I did actually know it was a Campbell story, but I wasn't 100% sure, so I was very aware to say that or not.
And it was a novella. It wasn't even a short story. So there you go.
Oh, okay. It was a bit longer. Okay.
A bit longer.
But again, it is different.
Sure.
It's more about Cold War paranoia. It's that kind of thing. It is the kind of story, from what I recall, that Rod Serling could have adapted it to the Twilight Zone, and it would have fit in just perfectly fine.
Nice.
It's like that kind of story.
Very cool.
But anyway.
You know what's weird about the John Carpenter one?
What?
That I didn't realize till years later, and I don't know if there's an actual connection here or not.
Mm-hmm.
The Thing in the John Carpenter film, that's a Gonagai demon.
That's true, it is. But
the way
it
works and all of that, that's how Gonagai explained the demon in the Devilman comic, was that they absorbed other life forms and took on their aspects.
Yeah, that's true.
Usually in gruesome, gory ways, like in the film.
The question is whether, and you're right, and the question would be whether Carpenter had ever seen any of Gonagai's work, which I kind of doubt. It's possible, but I doubt it, actually. But you're right, it is, especially if you watch the Devilman OAVs, it literally demonstrates that and how that all works. So yeah, that's a good point. That's definitely a good point. Anyway, so let's continue on. Hopefully, let's talk about E.T. and Happy Aliens. Let's stop talking about The Thing, which ironically enough, The Thing and E.T., if I recall, came out the same year.
Wow.
Yeah, I think they did, or they were very close. Yeah.
Yeah. So the same year, the kids got to see the happy, wonderful alien, and all the adults got to see the oh my god, that's horrific alien.
Yeah. and well, E.T. came after Close Encounters, so Close Encounters was like the big game changer, right? And E.T. actually, he got the idea for E.T. from Close Encounters, because when Spielberg was doing the last thing, there was actually a little guy with like long fingers and hands that he called Puck. That it was a puppet of some sort, and then he had this idea. Well, what if this little guy didn't get back on the mothership?
Right.
And so from there, he moved ahead from E.T. By the way, again, for more high strangeness stuff, Spielberg claimed that he had UFO encounters while making this. Some weird stuff that was happening while they were making it. They could see stuff in the sky. They had all kinds of weird power outages that happened and things that are happening in the sky while they were filming it. Weird stuff. Like it just again, the high strangeness factor is really, really unusual.
It is. But again, I'm gonna play. I guess this would be Alien Overlord's advocate here. If you're making a movie about something like that, there's always the possibility that your brain's moving in those circles and you're more aware of things that would come across as strange.
That's so true. I do this thing with my students, and I got it from Tony Robbins, but it makes perfect sense. We are deletion creatures, right? So we really focus only on the things that we want to see, basically. So like I tell my students, I say, okay, I want you to like look around the room right now, and I want you to look at everything in the room that is green. Look really quickly, and I memorize everything in the room that's green, and then I get them to close their eyes, and I say, okay, now tell me everything in the room that's brown. And they can't think of one thing. Because all they've been focused on is what's green. So, this is the argument, and I hear this too about a lot of people who spend a lot of time researching alien abductions or alien stuff, start having experiences themselves. So the whole idea, if you roll around with dogs, you get fleas, right? Mm-hmm. So if you spend a lot of time focused on a particular thing, you may end up getting that experience yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or when you look at the abyss looks back.
Yes. Thanks for going back to the blackness there, Rob.
Sorry.
We were just lightly into E.T. for like 20 seconds, and you took us to the abyss, which is another great alien movie, by the way.
It is, actually. That is that's one of my favorites, actually.
Me too.
E.T. is horrifying.
E.T. is horrifying?
He's this little misshapen, lumpy thing, and his head gets an erection when you scare him. He's got these like gangly arms, and it's like, ew.
Actually, I've known people that consider E.T. a horror film that were actually terrified by that movie.
Absolutely, I can see that.
Especially people who aren't used to watching horror, that E.T. can actually be kind of intense.
Well, I think it's because of E.T. I mean, I think E.T. and Close Encounters and Raiders of the Lost Ark and stuff like that, they started saying we need a PG-13 because there are elements of horror in there that are much more terrifying that you can't, put that in the same level as like Goonies.
Right, that's true.
Right?
Or you can.
Or you can.
Because wasn't E.T. originally, like the very original plan was it was going to be a horror movie?
Possibly. I know that the spoken word vinyl of it's pretty horrific. Did I tell you who did that? I found it in the CKDU radio station. Michael Jackson.
Oh wow!
Michael Jackson reads E.T. Yes. So
wow,
it was very weird.
That's like the most 80s thing ever.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
But he did Captain EO or EAA or whatever.
Yeah.
EO, Captain EO,
you're right.
Yeah. So I mean, I get the feeling that he's kind of alien himself.
Well, Michael Jackson was out there. There's no question on that. Yeah.
On another planet.
Well, that's one way to look at it.
He was moonwalking. Okay. Let's give him that.
Dun, dun, dun.
All right, so
but before we go, and again, I had so much here that I was thinking of because Close Encounters was a game changer. It really opened people's minds for what was going to happen in the ET world and what it meant to have disclosure, right? This idea that we actually happened. And it brought up something that kept coming back too was a project they called Serpo. Did you hear about that one, Don?
Nope.
Project Serpo was the alleged human alien exchange program between U.S. military personnel and a race of extraterrestrials from the Zeta Reticuli star system. And so they have said that they've done this exchange 2 or 3 times. One in 1965, 12 astronauts were taken to the planet. And then back in the 80s, when they did it was a second or a third exchange with Ronald Reagan as the president.
Yeah, because aliens like strawberry ice cream.
There you go.
Because isn't that the same sort of thing, though, where Dulce Base supposedly comes from?
Yes.
That it was part of that. And then Dulce Base is where they found out, supposedly, this is like real stuff, that the aliens were doing, like, they were abducting more people than they were allowed to by the U.S. government, and it was a big fight. And supposedly, it's still there sealed off, and they don't know if the aliens are dead or not. Yeah,
there was a guy who used to go around and show off his, like, fried off hand. Like, it was lasered off in this massive battle, and they just sealed the thing up, right? And,
wait. Okay, so the aliens had a base that the U.S. government knew about, and they were okay with, and then they discovered the aliens were, were not living up to their side of the bargain, so they decided to raid the base.
Though they had a bargain originally, which was, you give us technology, and we'll allow you to, do some experiments on the human civilization population, but only so many, and we had to know about it. And then the idea was the aliens were like, screw this, we'll do whatever we want. And then when they found that out, then there was, hell to pay, supposedly, right? So, That's why Ronnie Reagan wanted to set up the whole Star Wars program. Whatever happened to that base? The Star Wars... No, it's the Star Wars destruction... the Star Wars defense grid.
Yeah, that was orbital. It was supposedly to shoot down nukes, and then they discovered particle beams don't work through an atmosphere.
Right. Oh, okay. That's what happened, right? And the thing is,
and
he
it was
did
super
say,
expensive.
like, there was the big thing, which of course could be read as just some sort of metaphor, but he did say, I often wonder, this is Reagan, right? I often wonder if an alien species came, how quickly our differences would, melt away, and we would have to become one against an alien threat.
Right.
And he's like, that's a really weird thing to throw out there, but...
Which is funny, because you know who else gave that exact same speech?
Who?
Captain Global.
Oh, in Robotech. Yeah.
Commander of the SDF-1.
Robotech Macross. Yep, that's true. He gives that speech. Actually, technically, so does Watchmen. Because in the Watchmen, the whole point is that the Earth is about to go to nuclear war. Yeah. And the bad guy, quote unquote, is trying to basically set up a threat so that everyone will put down their guns and actually train them on space or, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was an old Outer Limits episode, too, back in the 60s.
It was?
Cool. Yeah, that the government had hired a bunch of people, and they were turning this guy into an alien. They were actually altering him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was what they wanted him to show up and be all scary and that, so that the world would unite to fight these supposed extraterrestrials.
Didn't he show up at UN headquarters or something like that? And then so of course he attacks with his advanced weapon, and they gun him down, and they say, "Oh my God, it's an alien!" And so it's a suicide mission basically.
Yeah, I can't remember how it ends. It has a weird ending, but I haven't seen it for a bajillion years.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. It's been 30 years since I saw it, though.
And the thing is, and we were talking about this, the movie industry, probably since the 50s, had been grabbing hold of a lot of concepts that were in the air, in the wind, or people have been writing about them in one way or another. You can call it historical or you can call it fictional. It really depends on what you're looking at. But they popularized things in science fiction that hadn't happened before. So things like Men in Black, Close Encounters of the Third Time, we talked about what the 5 kinds are. And the 4th kind, Area 51, all of those things kind of got really popularized.
Hold on, Jack. We actually didn't talk about the 5 kinds of encounters. Not during this conversation.
Right. Okay, so the 5 encounters, the Close Encounters, and this was done by the guy from Project Blue Book, at least. He talked about the 3. And the first one is when a person sees a UFO within 150 meters. That's a first kind. So my father had a close encounter of the first kind. And then he also had a second kind because it leaves evidence such as scorch marks, right?
Right.
That's the second kind. The third kind is visible aliens in or out of the craft, and things like Shag Harbor, or what had happened under Shag Harbor when they had the frogmen looking at the alien ship in the water, the USO, and they could see people through the windows. That's an example of a third kind. And then fourth kind is taken and experimented on, and that's the Travis Walton experience and Benny and Barney Hill. And now we have the fifth kind, which is what they call mutual bilateral communication. And
they have sex?
It would possibly no, but I mean it's the SETI people, right? The C-SETI, I guess, is what they're called. And it's the C-SETI people are set up by Greer. Is it David Greer? Michael Greer? I forget. It's Stephen Greer. Dr. Stephen Greer. And he set up Project Disclosure for a while, and he claims he has all this information but can't release it because of various different, promises he's made to people, or they won't feed him any more information. And which is really, that's really a really easy thing to say.
Convenient.
Very convenient is the word I'm looking for. But anyway, he has people come out and they'll go to like the New Mexican desert. By the way, there's a bunch of places, like the best places to find about UFOs. There's like 10 or 11 places to check out UFOs, which is great. And one of them is in like Sedona, right? And the whole bit. But anyway, so he gets these people out and they sort of meditate. And then the UFOs apparently come out, and they filmed them and stuff like that, come out of the sky, and it's like they're waving at them or something. They don't actually wave at them, but they just come out and show themselves. Which to me seems like a real waste of fuel, right?
Right, yeah.
Quick! There's like a handful of human beings meditating about us. Let's leave our star system and go and appear before them. Not like land or anything, just like flash up in the air and let them know we're here.
Exactly.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. So
No, it doesn't.
That lends itself to the idea that nobody, that's possibly even more horrifying to think about extraterrestrials. What if they're dumber than us? And it's like, oh, hey, Bob, I'm going to go scare those humans. Watch. Ah, look at them run. Ah! And then they hop in their ship, take off. And the only reason they have advanced technology is because somewhere during our technological development, we took an entirely wrong turn and are just doing everything the hard way.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. They were so much smarter. Yeah.
Or luckier.
Or luckier. Right.
Yeah.
Luckier. Yeah, luckier. Right. They had one Tesla guy who figured out how to do all of the things that Tesla promised that he could do, and they just decided to glom onto that technology. Or they could be teenagers, right?
Well,
they're
yeah,
just
that's
taking off in the old UFO sports coupe, and they're trying to buzz those humans.
Teenagers from outer space.
Well, the old DR and Quinch comic was from 2000 AD was basically that.
I love DR and Quinch.
That needs to be a movie.
It does. It does. That would be great. That would be great. Unfortunately, even though we had a link, and you can find that, but in Canada alone, there have been a monstrous amount of UFO sightings in just 2017 alone.
Right.
Like well over 1,000 that they found, kind of thing. And that being said, we're still not on the top 8 places to search for UFOs.
Yeah.
Right.
Chile being the number one. And the Alma Observatory being another. San Clemente UFO Trail, which I've never heard of. El Cuidamos Astronomical Hotel is another. The Andes UFO Tours up in the Andes, apparently. Wiltshire, England, of all places.
Right.
Area 51, as everybody would expect, in Nevada.
Or Groom Lake.
Groom Lake, yes. And Planet XV UFO hunting trip. I've never heard of that one, but I guess that's from Area 51. Sedona, I've already mentioned, in Arizona. So the Sedona tours. And then Wycliffe in Australia, I think. And then there's one place in Russia, which is known as the M Triangle in Russia. So, and then another place in California, which is Joshua Tree. So there's various places that are supposed to be the hot spots. We haven't talked about Skinwalker Ranch, which is kind of like the Dulce base, right? Is that in the same area?
Yeah, kind of, except Skinwalker Ranch is it's a place of all kinds of weirdness, as I recall. It's not specifically like flying saucers.
No, but there have been discussions about aliens too, specifically in there too.
Yeah, because you've hit on a couple things. You've hit on a couple things that come up every now and then. That the flying saucer thing ties in with other stuff. That there's a lot of reports of, say, Bigfoot activity that ties in with UFO sightings, and you mentioned like the Alps, and I know like in the Himalayas and that. There's supposedly like UFO sightings that tie in with the Yeti and things like that.
Wow. Yeah. It's really weird because there's so many elements. I have a friend of mine, and her husband worked for NASA as a technical kind of guy for NASA. And she was sort of joking about it one time, and he never talks about UFOs. And she was joking about it one time. And she's like, "Yeah, if you ever found a UFO, they'd have to kill you, right?" And he looked really stricken. And she said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I just want to let you know that there are units out there that are designed to make sure those kind of things never come out." So he was suggesting that there's military units designed that if somebody starts saying something, which because there's been a lot. Let's be fair. There's been a lot of people who have died mysteriously.
Yeah.
Like James Forrestal. Now, he was the guy who was in charge of the whole Roswell investigation. Really well known, highly decorated, top of the line military guy. Retired and the whole bit. The story was he was gonna break everything about the UFOs. Found dead, threw himself out of his hotel window.
Was it a hotel or a hospital?
It could have been a hospital. You're right. I thought it was a hotel, but it could have been a hospital window. So, but it's just there's a bunch of those things. So there's another one. It's not a UFO necessarily, but it was like a guy who the official record is that he killed himself by tying himself up and cutting his own throat while folding himself in his own suitcase.
Yeah, well.
So they found him like folded up in his suitcase with his hands tied behind his back with his throat cut, and it was like suicide.
Clearly a suicide.
I'm not so sure that's exactly true.
Well, that's for some reason that kind of suicide only seems to happen in England, mostly Europe.
Yes,
and it always somehow seems to involve the Russians. We're not quite sure why, but you know.
Well, speaking of England, wasn't the Rendlesham Forest incident a big one in England?
Yep,
it was.
And again, that's a bunch of really well-documented elements there with really highly credible military people.
That's true.
There's a bunch of, and you know, even the Canadian ones. I was really shocked when I read about the Falcon. Is it Falcon Ridge?
I don't know that
incident.
One. Okay.
Falcon Lake incident. And they've it's like 50. Just recently, CBC had a little anniversary, like 50 years later, and it was just this guy in Falcon Lake, and Falcon Lake's like northern Ontario, I think, or northern Quebec. I can't remember exactly where. And it's like in the middle of nowhere, and he's out like fishing or something, and he sees this like cigar like 50s style rocket ship almost landed there. And he comes over and he thinks like it could be some sort of like Russian rocket or something. And he's like, hello. And he's like knocking on the thing. Like he's even there to knock on the thing. And then it hits him with something and he blasts off and leaves him there. And he wakes up because it like knocks him out. And he wakes up at night and he's in terrible pain. And he gets to the hospital. And eventually, like somehow he gets back to the hospital. And he's got radiation burns all over his body. And so it's considered to be actually like Canada's most credible flying saucer or some kind of, you know, alien interaction because there was so much physical evidence. He died of cancer several years afterwards. But this guy had like no reason to make this stuff up, and there's no way, like the doctors looked at it like, this just doesn't happen. This guy was hit with something that was high levels of radiation.
Yeah. Right.
So
that's sufficiently weird.
Yeah. There's a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Shag Harbor, of course, is also a little bit on the
strange.
Strange side.
For sure.
And weren't there a ton of witnesses for that one too?
Big time. And foam in the water, like this orangey kind of foam that happened in the water. Now, to be fair, I have a friend of mine. I talked to you about him earlier, and his father was a military officer, and he seemed to suggest that it was like a nuclear missile that got knocked out of the sky, and they didn't want to say that this thing could have been really, really, really bad, so they said, "Oh yeah, it was probably an alien ship," right? So I don't know. I don't know if that's the truth. That's just his story about it, kind of thing. But there was, and I thought this. I mentioned the one with the frogmen and seeing an alien ship in the water. That actually was a couple of days later,
right?
But it's still connected to the Shag Harbor because it's like a couple of miles down river, kind of there, down in the water.
Right. Yeah.
So it is somewhat connected, but it could be a secondary sighting of some sort. So.
Right, they're not necessarily the same sighting.
Exactly. Yeah. Speaking of sightings, I mean, Phoenix Lights.
Yep.
Like to the argument that it was like the military came up with that this was just flares does not fly. It just doesn't fit. There's no way flares move like that. And there's a lady who wrote a book who was a total skeptic, and she wrote Phoenix Lights: A Skeptics Discover That We're Not Alone. And she saw the Phoenix Lights like 2 or 3 days in a row. It wasn't just that one time where everybody saw it over Phoenix. She lives out near the mountains with her husband. I guess she was a therapist, psychiatrist. And so she and her husband were documenting this for a couple of days, this massive, and again, it was a triangular craft, right? That everybody suggests that they saw. So there have been really massive sightings. Now, it could be mass hallucinations, right?
It could be.
But, or just that idea they're misinterpreting what they see.
Exactly.
You sure?
Things things like that, you've always got the problem that if it is the military doing something, the last thing they're going to want to tell you is they're doing something. Even if it's like nothing all that like weird or covert or dangerous, they're not going to tell you because there's always that fear that somebody might glean some information about something from it.
Right.
And that's why they tend to just keep their mouth shut about absolutely everything. But that makes it look like they're trying to cover something up. And then if you already think they are, that just gives you more fuel for your conspiracy fire.
True. But that would work in their favor if it was something that didn't make them look like fools. Right?
Yeah.
What about the examples of like when ships were shot down? That puts the military in a bad situation, or even worse, the aliens shutting down nuclear sites. Like those risks. No military wants to have that information go out because it makes them look helpless, right? And there's several different examples of that from both British and U.S. nuclear missile sites where they have examples of UFOs coming up and either shutting down entirely or reversing counts or all kinds of weird stuff. So.
Reversing counts. Wait, they were planning to launch?
Well, there was one example of one where they were like counting down because they were doing a test run or something like that to fire off, and the actual numbers like reversed or something. It was very weird. I forget exactly what happened with that, but again, some of these, how do you spend the time corroborating these, right?
Yeah.
You do hear about these from third-party people, and like you said, the military doesn't want to say too much about it. You can get leaks from people in the military, but more times than not, they're not going to. Which is why I always argue, like, those project disclosures are amazing, because these people are coming up on camera, and they say at the end, and this is what I saw, or this is what I witnessed, and I will say this in front of a Senate committee.
Right.
So they're willing to put their credibility behind what they say, and I can appreciate that.
Right.
You know what's a scary thought, though? That President Trump may actually know the truth of the whole alien thing.
It's true. Well, they do say that very few of the presidents know, though. Like there's so many black op organizations that are just really paid for under the, the president doesn't have the high. If you look at the presidential security, he's nowhere near the highest security.
Yeah.
Right,
because he's potentially there for 4 years. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So all these other people are career bureaucrats, right? The people that are there, they're there for 30, 40 years. They know that even when they retire, they can kill them. Whereas the president's always seriously, if they're going to start saying something, they can have them killed if they want it. Right, and their families, because they're nobodies, right? But the president has a detachment of Secret Service for the rest of his life.
That's true.
And it becomes a much bigger thing if somebody that large, like if Ronald Reagan, suddenly is assassinated, that's even if he hasn't been president for 15, 20 years, that's an international incident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that they say supposedly the last president that was really interested in the whole alien thing was Kennedy.
No,
Carter.
Carter was.
No,
Carter saw one himself, and he was fascinated. He said Close Encounters of the Third Kind was his favorite movie.
Yeah, but he didn't make any big push to reveal anything or that.
Yes.
He made a report.
Right.
That supposedly Kennedy was the last one that was really looking into things. Although that's a rumor. There were rumors, too, that was Reagan. That Reagan was actually concerned about something that he saw, too.
The rumor is the last president who actually knows for sure the stuff was Bush Sr., because he was the head of the CIA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he knew far more than any of those other people for that reason. Or I guess he knows. He's still alive, right? So.
Yes, he is, actually. Barely, but he is.
He's not doing too good, but he's still around.
Yeah, that's true. And you remember, even when he became president, he already knew where all the bodies were buried.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in a lot of weird ways. He was kind of a really quiet Putin that way, wasn't he?
That's what I was just thinking. He basically was Putin. He was just much more quiet about it.
He wasn't really a tyrant like Putin is, but he filled that same niche. Really
I love the Simpsons episodes with him.
Oh,
him and Homer. Remember those? He's like a neighbor of Homer's. They were brilliant. They're so much fun. He was already retired.
He was a feud with Homer.
He's in a feud with Homer. That was such a brilliant series of stories.
Actually, he's a feud with Bart.
Yes, with Bart. Well, he was kind of like Mr. Wilson and Dennis the Menace, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Oh, Mr. Bush, right?
I love how that one ended.
That's right.
Bush moves out and
Ford comes in.
Ford moves in. Would you like to have nachos? Would I? And then both of them trip and they both go, go!
Yeah.
You do a pretty good Homer there. That was
Yep. Okay, so since I think we're reaching the point to kind of wrap this thing up. So, any other UFO stories or anything else we want to talk about before we call it a day?
Well, I want to mention quickly that there are both 11 pop stars who have claimed to see UFOs, and there are some classic rock songs that have to do with UFOs. That's still part of the culture, right? Mm-hmm. Like Creedence Clearwater Revival had one called "It Came From Out of the Sky."
Right.
And there's of course we don't, Starman is probably the number one that you want to think about kind of thing, right? So,
but a lot of that stuff really comes out of like the 70s, and it's the whole, brother from another planet, or more Children of the Gods, Daikin stuff was just so damn popular in the 70s that you got so much of that.
Well, hey, who's the Megadeth fan?
Okay, valid point.
Hangar 18.
Yeah.
That's true.
1990, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, we didn't even really talk about some of the UFO movies that came out. Hangar 18 is definitely one of them.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
The Ramones did Zero UFO in 89.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
There's a couple of them. But you're right. Most of them around 60s and 70s for the whole brother, trying to find, that connection. We are all Aquarians.
Yeah.
kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
Utopians, actually.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was saying at the beginning, that you see a lot of what affects extraterrestrials and pop culture is affected by what's going on. Like, because that was when you got to the 80s. You started to see towards the middle of the 80s, going to the end of the 80s, you started to see a lot of mistrust of government and that was where you'd see more movies and TV shows with the Men in Black and government conspiracies and cover-ups. Whereas in the 70s, you had some of that, but it usually focused more like Close Encounters, because that's about a government cover-up, but it focuses on the interaction more between the extraterrestrials and whoever the main characters are.
Right.
Mm. True.
Okay, so what are your favorite movies that have to do with aliens?
Like this kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I would, I'll give you some of mine. Because I don't want to, I wouldn't say something like The Fifth Element really counts. Because that's like future, right?
Well, it's like
if we were
Star
talking
Wars
about
aliens.
Yeah, Star Wars kind of thing. So you want to talk about aliens that come to Earth or something like that. So in that way, I probably wouldn't count aliens, right? In the same way.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to go for it, but I would count Predator.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And
one of my favorites.
Yeah, and District 9, which is a more recent one. Have you ever seen that? 2009. Really, I quite enjoyed that. Super 8 was okay. The Abyss, I would say, was quite cool.
Yep.
Mars Attacks is a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's okay. Actually, by the way, I just want to note The Abyss is awesome, especially if you see with the proper ending instead of the cut down ending.
Okay.
I don't know if you know this. There are two versions.
I own it. I own the director's cut, and I haven't seen it yet because I figured it was the same.
No.
Okay.
Because there's a really important scene with the aliens.
Okay.
So effectively that they take out of the theatrical cut that's there in the director's cut.
Oh.
So you might want to actually watch that sometime. I'm not going to spoil it.
Okay.
But Don knows what I'm talking about.
Well, here's one that I enjoyed.
It changes the
that
context of the whole thing.
I think you probably really liked, and I liked Cloverfield.
Yeah, it was okay.
You're a huge monster. You're a huge monster film man. So I figured,
I am, but I found Cloverfield interesting, but it was just so much shaky cam that I was getting nauseous while watching it.
That's fair enough.
It's got a lot of neat ideas to it. Yep.
Now, I haven't seen The Arrival that Charlie Sheen was in.
Right.
Was it any good?
Is that the new one or the original?
Yeah.
Because that there's a remake they did just a couple years ago.
Yeah, 96 was the Charlie Sheen, and I think that's the remake, isn't it? Or no, there was another one.
No,
that
that's
was
the original.
recent.
There was a recent one.
Oh, there was a recent one. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was just called Arrival.
Yeah.
And of course, War of the Worlds.
Yeah. Okay.
So those are some of my favorites. What are some of yours?
Okay, let me go through. All right, so let's see. It Came from Outer Space. Always a fan.
Okay.
The one that always stuck with me as a kid, though, was, well, two of them. One, the original War of the Worlds, of course.
Right.
The George Powell one from the 1950s.
H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, 1953. American
Yep,
Technicolor, right, yeah.
Yep, exactly, which I watched that movie so many times, and I love that. Still love that film.
And that sound effect is always still the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That
That's
thing.
awesome.
Oh, such a great film. Because I'm definitely not talking about the Tom Cruise remake from
Right.
about 10 years ago. So there's that. Personal favorite has always been Earth versus the Flying Saucers. Our local indie station, or semi-local, it was from Cleveland, would show that movie like at least once a year. And that was one of my personal favorites. Because it was just there to capitalize on the whole flying saucers craze of the time. Like, it literally, that's all it is. I mean, the aliens, if I remember, I don't think you really even, the aliens are kind of just these vague shadow things that you see barely, and you see a hand or something, if I remember right.
No, they're always wearing these suits that they're completely covered up.
Yeah.
That you never see what they look like under the suits or anything.
Right,
Wow.
yeah, there we go. So Earth versus the Flying Saucers, it's a little fun. Plus, if I recall right, I think the saucers might even be Harryhausen.
Yeah.
I believe he did the saucer work in them. So,
cool.
Anything with Harryhausen, automatic,
big time. Yeah,
big
sure.
time. Showing my Japanese roots, of course. We have the Mysterians in 57, which is another fun one. Which is kind of a Japanese, war invasion. It's a Japanese invasion movie, basically.
Cool.
What would be some other good ones? Because again, I don't want to. I'm going to skip Plan 9 from Outer Space because Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Because of your stupid brain, stupid.
Exactly.
What were the other 8 plans? I want to know. The ones that didn't work.
Oh man, they could make a prequel.
That's right. 7 prequels. Plan 1 from Outer Space.
Yep. There we go. What else I'm just quickly looking at the big list, trying to jog my memory here. There's the UFO TV series, which we should definitely mention.
Sure.
UFO, literally, that's what it's called, the British series. Which every year I keep hearing they're going to remake it next year, but it never quite happens.
Right.
So there's that. Alien, of course. You mentioned Predator. Let's see.
What about the original V? Did you like the original V?
I did when it was on. I haven't seen it in so long. I have a funny feeling it won't hold up very well, but I imagine it's very.
And I like the original series. I didn't like when they extended it because then it just got killed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And they they did a sequel series and then they did a regular series, if I remember right.
Yeah. And I mean, it was one of those situations like her swallowing the rat was water cooler talk.
Oh yeah.
Everybody remembers that, right? So.
Yeah, everyone remembers that. Oh yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, the original thing, of course, we've already mentioned. Let's see, what else would be the
Mork and Mindy, right?
Mindy. Yep, there we go. Well, not
or
one of my
Alf,
personal
if you want to go that way.
Oh God.
Sadly, I think I watched more Alf as a kid than Mork and Mindy. I guess I found it more entertaining than Mork and Mindy. Sorry. I'm not quite sure why. I know there's one that what was I trying to remember? Because you mentioned Predator, Terror Vision, which is a messed up little film.
Yes, it is. It's one of my favorites.
One of your favorites. That's true. Oh, They Live.
Oh yes,
They Live.
Good call. Good call.
Yeah, They Live. Yeah, exactly.
Put on the glasses.
No.
It's like the longest 20-minute WWF fighting scene. Put on the glasses. F you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's got to be one of cinema's greatest scenes right there.
That's right.
Yep, exactly.
Why didn't he get that Oscar for that series alone?
No, the scene he should have gotten for is so I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum. I'm all out of bubblegum.
All out of bubblegum. His acting was horrible in that. I don't like this one bit. No, I don't like this one bit. That was some realistic acting there. Roddy
was so
Piper.
Entertaining.
Oh, he was. Hell Comes to Frogtown. That was another great one.
I never did see that one.
Oh, it's a must.
Great is a strong word, but okay.
He's a very entertaining actor. Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's mostly it. I mean, there's not. I kind of grew up with a lot of the classics, oddly enough.
Sure.
And so, I mean, there's other, there's tons of other Alien movies, but I've just never been drawn to most of them. In fact, I find that most of the Alien movies that I've seen in my life are ultimately just derivations of the same shit they were doing in the 50s and 60s. It's just with better special effects for the most part.
Well, what is the most recent movie with like the zombie like children, and they smell human beings and they kill them, and it's like an alien like tree or something that infects them or something? I forget. I just watched it, and it's a British show, and it's really well done. A British movie.
What? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, I even like listened to the audiobook of it, and it's so what happens is like I just remember elements of it, and it starts off, and most human beings are wiped out, and what happens is all these children are infected with this stuff, and if they smell your sweat or something, they just go feral and kill you all, and so they have all the children there, and they bring them in, like they're sitting in these single rooms, and they bring them in and they lock them down in their desks, and the teacher starts teaching them, right? And so because what she wants to do is try to bring back like some of their humanity, and find out what's happening, and it's something to do with some kind of like alien tree or something like that has created these things, right? And it's really, I'll have to go find that and send that to you. But that was really quite cool. There's been a couple of neat sort of alien takes on stuff which I liked. And Don, I'm just going to be really upset if Out of This World, the television series from 1987, isn't on your list.
Well, do you know what Out of This World was? It was just the comedy version of The Powers of Matthew Starr.
Exactly. Yeah. But it starred Burt Reynolds and Doug McClure. So
you may remember him from such films as
That's right.
Yes, that's true. Well, no, correction. It never officially stars Burt Reynolds because he was like best buds with the producer or something.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So he and he never got any credit because if he did, it would be issues with pay and everything like that. So
for sure,
did it for fun.
Yeah, wasn't he did guest bits because wasn't he supposed to be what was the kid's name? Evie's father?
Evie. Yeah, he was Evie's father.
Yeah.
He's Evie's father, and almost not every episode pretty much. She wanders in and she like taps it and goes, "Dad, I have a problem," or needs to talk. And it's him doing that's the father.
Right.
So because he's off like in another galaxy or whatever, and it's their father-daughter phone call each episode. Yeah, that's him.
More calling Orson. Come in, Orson. More calling Orson. Come in,
was
laser
just
breath.
Basically Robin Williams on way too much cocaine, just ad-libbing pretty much the entire thing.
Oh, when they had Jonathan Winters on there was like nobody could take a breath. They were just constantly ad-libbing with each other all the time.
Right.
It was crazy. That was the weirdest take too, having Jonathan Winters as his son. And aging backwards. Yes. Is First Wave on your list?
No.
Sorry, that's Jack. That's a Jack thing. I don't think either of us really got into it. So, Don, what is your list? I think I'm done mine, or my attempt at one anyway. What's yours?
I got a few, except I don't know if I have any movies on mine. One thing that you mentioned, TV show that I liked that was a weird take on the extraterrestrial thing was Torchwood.
Oh yeah.
Torchwood. I only like Children of Earth. I thought that one was a pretty neat take. The other ones I wasn't that fond of, but that one was good.
It had kind of an up and down, but they did all your standard alien tropes, but in the most disturbing, violent, horrible, depressing way possible. Like the Children of Men one, where you find out that the aliens think Earth children are just delightfully addictive.
Literally.
Yeah, so they're trading them off every so. Yeah, that was a little.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed that just because it was nice to see somebody pushing the limits of taste,
like
all of the comic book guys I've loved over the years.
Right.
Like Gona Guy and all the underground dudes, and it was nice to see that on TV. So it was a good one. One that I like too is the I'm still a big fan of the old Dark Conspiracy role-playing game.
Oh yeah,
of course.
Which is the same idea that it's cyberpunk, but society collapses because that's part of the aliens' plan. And the aliens used to be nice guys, but then they got possessed by an evil, demonic, extra-dimensional entity that they accidentally released on one of the moons of Mars.
I hate it when that happens.
So do I.
At least it's not a complex plot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, exactly. Nothing. And the other thing that I really used to get a kick out of was the old Marvel Comics Eternals.
Oh, yeah.
Which, again, was the Von Dynek and Chariots of the Gods idea in superhero form.
Actually, there's an Eternals movie coming. They've said that's part of their next wave, Yeah,
and it's probably not going to be that good because they're just going to try to make them the Inhumans again.
Yeah, they will, basically. Because they basically are the Inhumans. It's basically the same thing.
Well, that's Hancock, too, isn't it?
Kinda.
Because they sort of very much like the Hancock, the story Hancock, right? He's like this ancient, like god-like creature that came from another world or something. He and his wife, and they're the last two ones alive, and they have godlike powers. They do that a lot, don't they?
Yeah. It's a running theme. And then the other side of that, because you mentioned V, which I will confess I did not care for. Had the trope that as soon as you have an alien human baby, they're godlike and have massive powers for something, rather than crippling mutants. Yeah. Although again, they did that in Marvel did that because they had a character called Hybrid.
Yep.
That was the child of a dire wraith.
Yes.
Alien.
And Rom Space.
Yeah, Rom. Yep.
Yeah. I have that comic.
And Hybrid had crippling, horrible mutations and such. And that's another one I'd have to say. I like the Rom. Rom was a really good. The old Marvel one was a really good comic.
Loved Rom. And they're making a movie of that too, right?
Yeah, but it's like the Eternals. They're going to be. There's new versions of all of these characters.
Yeah,
right.
And they good. I'm not real excited because the new versions are kind of more like everything else.
Yeah.
Whereas like the ones we were taught about, like the Eternals, the original Eternals and Rom were really their own thing, and they went to really weird, unpleasant places in a lot of, and you're not going to see that nowadays. And they're going to be tied directly into everything.
Right.
So you're going to find out that like in Rom, because Marvel doesn't know it anymore. But like the Eternals, you'll find out that one of them is like Nick Fury's dad and started S.H.I.E.L.D. because S.H.I.E.L.D. is part of everything. And Norman Osborn is like the child of a deviant or something because Norman Osborn's behind all the evil in like the Marvel universe now. And it's going to be, okay, whatever.
Right. Maybe.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, we might see some of that.
And Dark Skies. We can't forget Dark Skies. That's still one of my favorites.
I also have a fondness for I Come in Peace.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know why. It's not a good film. Yeah. For those who don't know, it's basically about like a alien that's basically just, what's it doing? I don't remember what it's doing in the movie. It's been a while.
It's Terminator with an alien because he's here to kill somebody.
But he's killing multiple people and he's like doing stuff to them and things like that. And the one thing he knows how to say is "I come in peace." He accidentally learns that at the beginning of the film. So as he's killing all these people and he keeps saying "I come in peace, I come in peace," and then he doesn't really know what it actually means, or maybe he does or whatever. But so everyone's like, "You come in peace, what?"
That's hilarious.
It is actually.
There were a fair number of those like cheesy ass 80s like alien movies that I liked.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't remember. The only one I really remember was The Hidden.
Oh yeah, The Hidden.
Because it had those horrifying, disturbing slug monsters that would possess like, I think, was it dead bodies or were you still alive when they crawled in your mouth?
I think they were still alive.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that was one of the nastier ones. And now, mind you, aren't there like two of them and they're hunting each other or something like that?
Yeah, because the one's a cop, and then the other one's a criminal. Because the cop teams up with an Earth cop, because the buddy cop thing was a big thing in the 80s, and they're tracking. And the thing is, they can jump bodies.
Right? Yeah.
So that's why they can't find this criminal one, because it keeps jumping from one body to another.
Yeah. Yep. I could see that.
Because I seem to recall there were a couple of alien movies in the 80s that's what they did. They came to Earth and they possessed people to stay hidden.
Yeah, or variations thereof. Yeah, that was pretty popular. Just the same as the alien cop teaming up with the human cop to hunt down aliens on Earth. My God, there were so many of those.
Yes, there actually weren't there?
Yeah, they did that a lot.
Okay, I know the name of the movie and I know the name of the book.
Okay,
the
what
one
is
I was telling you, it's called The Girl with All the Gifts.
Oh, that thing.
Oh, okay.
Is that what that's about? I've only seen the preview. I've never seen the movie.
It's this strange fungus that's changed everyone into a thoughtless flesh-eating monster. I thought the fungus had to do with some sort of like it came down from space at some point, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's just a zombie-ish movie, but yeah, The Girl with All the Gifts.
Well, that's how they portray it in the trailer, which I've seen, but I've never. But it's possible that the actual movie, since you've seen it, presumably, is actually about the tree and everything, but the movie just portrays it differently.
Right.
Or sorry, the trailer. Sorry, the trailer isn't giving us an accurate look. Surprise.
Yeah. By the way, thank you, Don. That is another UFO theme, hybrids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is a theme that they talk about. Like, I mean, Roswell and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. They talk about, hybrid children. And of course, the ones in Roswell, the television, they have all powers too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's something magical about humans. We can't do anything, but if you give us a little bit of alien DNA, we are super powerful.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that pissed me off in V was like the
yes,
and again, 40-year-old spoilers for anyone listening, where they were gonna like blow up the alien mothership and it would cook the entire Earth, and then like the alien space baby that they had with Freddy Krueger ends up just absorbing all the energy because she's like miraculous. You're like, fuck off.
Yep. That was near the end of the show, though. I think they like tied it all up with that by her being. They called her the Star Child. Remember?
Yep, they did. Yep.
Oh, jeez, that was awful.
But they did shit like that because I remember the end of the first episode is kind of where it was the end of the first, the beginning of the second was where they lost me on that show,
right?
Because they found the human resistance secret base and it's like on a mountain or something.
Yeah.
And the alien shuttle's coming in and the hero's out there and she pulls out her like 44 and the aliens are shooting for some reason. They're missing because they didn't invent targeting. And she fires her 44 and like blows the front off of this ship that can survive re-entry and like fucks up the controls. And he's like, we must retreat. And I'm like, really? You have to retreat from some person with a fucking handgun?
Mm-hmm.
Well, to be fair, they're wearing plastic masks, so they can't see anything.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Things would be easier if we just show our lizard faces.
Yep.
Because it was an interesting idea. Like, there was a lot of shows in the 80s that did that it's a cool premise. It looked neat. Some of the characters are interesting, but then in execution, it just falls apart because they would just do the same old shit.
Yeah. Well, they wanted to tie it into the whole Nazi Germany thing, right? So even the symbol of the visitors had very swastika-like.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
well, remember
that was cool. That was kind of cool.
Yeah. That was the great age of the miniseries there was one I think there was one called America with a K.
Yeah.
Where they took over, where the Russians took over. And there was, Winds of War. Like, they kept trying to do those big miniseries, the big budget stuff back then in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't.
Yeah, you were talking about that in another episode. You didn't say North and South.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, North and South was a huge one. Yeah, Roots, of course. And
yes. Yeah. You did mention Roots and Shogun. And there's a couple others. But anyway, no, you didn't mention North and South. I was listening. I was just like,
okay.
I can say that.
Okay. On that note, I think that we have covered UFOs and popular culture as best we can for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It may have been a little bit all over the place, but unfortunately, so are UFOs. So it all kind of works out. Thanks for coming on, Jack, and bringing some grand tales, including your father's experience, to the show. That's really awesome.
Well, thanks for having me again, guys. It was always fun.
Yep. And thank you, listeners, for hanging out. If you've had some weird UFO experiences, feel free to come on to obeythedna.com and post them in the comment section, and we'll share some of our knowledge of the unknown. Until next time, stay safe. May the Force be with you.
And keep watching the skies!
Of course.
There we go. Now we're done.
Good night, folks. Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya!